Hey there, it seems like you want to become a superhero, maybe a supervillain, I'll never tell, but you don't know how. Well, this is the best place to be because I'll tell you exactly what makes a great sidekick. How do you stand out and become best the best? And while there are a lot of sidekicks with superpowers, and that is how a lot of people enter their foray into this more expansive mythos and lore, the best ones usually are those who have to struggle, those who are humans who have to make it to those big leagues. They have mentors that had to fight that same fight. They had to walk the walk. And now you have to do the exact same thing. Learn all this extra skills along with that base foundation of training. So it's going to take a lot of work on top of the fact that you are a normal human entering pretty treacherous waters, right? You don't know anything about the lore, at least from an insider perspective. From the outside, it's very terrifying, it's very confusing, there's a lot of mystery to these greater beings, to these worldwide, even universe-spanning threats. But once you get the know-how, the spicy, juicy stuff, the inner workings of a lot of these things, you start to realize how small you are in the bigger picture. But will you let that stop you? Or will that be motivation for you to climb up that ladder, to be stronger, smarter, better than all of your peers? And today I'll give you a guideline on some of my favorite sidekicks of all time. And most of them, if not all, don't have any superpowers. Yes, a lot of them might be more iconic than the ones I named today, but in general, I'm going for characters that are the best, in my opinion, from a storytelling perspective. Not just in terms of power, but in character, maybe even what they do in the long run, right? How they fit within that mythos. What do they add to that mythos? Their personality, their stories, the things that make them stand out. Maybe how they work in tandem with their partner, the mentor-mentee relationship. How do they change them? How do they complement them? Are you the peanut butter to their jelly? If that's the case, then you have the perfect formula of being a sidekick, one that will succeed in a very dangerous world. And the examples I use today will be my idea of what makes a sidekick so important to the modern day, why I believe they are still relevant. And the first one on my list is a little known character that some of you guys might know called Harley Quinn, a character that I would not gas up for the life of me in any other circumstance. However, I will not let go of the opportunity to talk about animated series Harley. The best, funny, psychotic, and overall just the OG, the original, when it comes to any version of Harley. She is, for all intents and purposes, the biblical version that we all should strive to have in any sort of representation and just in any adaptation that there might be. The gold standard, need I say more? But let's take a step back, because Harley Quinn, she was created for, of course, Batman the Animated Series by Paul Dini, Bruce Timm, and a multitude of other creators. Of course, there's a huge team working on Batman at the time, debuting in Joker's favor, I'm pretty sure, as a gag henchwoman, right? That's all she ever was. But she immediately stole the show, in my opinion, for a lot of the scenes that she was in. And that matters a lot for this sidekick discussion, because she wasn't conceived as a comic legacy kind of inheriting the mantle type of character. She was built full-heartedly to serve the lead villain and their story, to stand next to him, to talk to him, to enable him, and more importantly, and possibly most crucially, to reflect him. In that sense, she is the purest kind of sidekick that there is. Not a co-star, not a partner with equal billing. This isn't Batman and Robin. Someone whose presence and perspective actively reshapes our understanding of this principle of what a sidekick is and influences basically the future of the story to come. But unlike many sidekicks on this list, and just in general, they model heroism. Harley, in my opinion, models dependence and complicity. Thankfully, she slowly fights her way out of it. Even though my favorite version of Harley is one who's very complicit with the Joker, this needed to happen. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you ask, in terms of the show, she wasn't able to completely separate herself from the Joker. Many times she has the realization that Joker is not good for her, but because she has a very in-the-moment type of feeling, my euphoria, that happens through the Joker, even though he does do some crazy things to me. That doesn't matter because this moment, he's being nice to me. She is a character who starts off as a comic relief, but slowly but surely she becomes the narrative grease for a lot of the Joker's schemes, and then evolves into a diagnostic tool for the audience, right? Through Harley, we learn what it actually costs to live in Gotham's shadow, and what it means to be caught within the gravity of somebody else, their gravitational field. Yes, we've seen something like Robin, but not to that extent in the show, right? We didn't really see the trauma and the damage it could cause to be a sidekick until Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker, at least in the hero standpoint, because in that storyline right there, Tim Drake becomes a little Robin after being tortured in Arkham Asylum, something that Harley Quinn is completely complicit to as well. She had full responsibility alongside the Joker for that happening to Tim. But from the jump, what makes her unique is her voice and her mannerisms. Those are her secret weapons, because her voice has a very Brooklyn cadence to it, with a very, what will I say, like vaudeville timing, and then of course the glee for like slapstick violence and comedy in Joker's Favor, Harley Quinnade, and Harley and Ivy. All of these episodes, it shows her theatricality, and that's what makes her really live up to the rest of the Gotham rogues. She fits in just like a glove. It amplifies the show and its pulpy vibe, while also having her very cheerfulness and chaos attitude, which really reflects off of Joker and the horror that he has. It makes everything feel more dissonant. And obviously, as we've seen with her hopping around, she is an ex-gymnast. But most importantly, despite all of that, she is a trained psychiatrist, one who has a very misapplied empathy. And this becomes her very secret superpower in terms of how she's implemented into the story, because why would we not want to follow one of the Arkham psychiatrists? That just sounds like a genie in a bottle, a light bulb going off. Why did nobody else think of this? But it also becomes her very tragic flaw. Mad Love, one of my favorite storylines of all time in terms of Batman the Animated Series, Dr. Harleen Quinzel is very smart, ambitious, and very initially critical. She sees Joker as a weapon, but then Joker weaponizes her compassion by feeding her very curated sob stories, right? The story about, if I must have a past, it might as well be multiple choice. But he's doing all of this on purpose, and it really reflames the clown-like devotion that she has as the endpoint of a professional's empathy twisted towards obsession. And then from here we see, I guess, a duality, right? She's hyper-competent, but totally blinkered out of her mind, right? It gives Harley a dimension beyond being the funny henchwoman. She's volatile, but very warm, I guess. Cunning, but also very naive. If I was to give an analysis or an analogy, I would say she is the class clown who also knows how the classroom works, the ins and outs. She's doing a lot of it as a show, but at the end of the day, there's some things that she isn't privy to. On a mechanical level, Harley is Joker's stage manager. She corrals a bunch of the goons, she sets up the props, she keeps the show moving while he grabs the spotlight. One of her key traits, and honestly one of my favorites, is how adaptable that she is, and it often saves the scene. I'm going to call it the scene because Joker and Harley, they basically play their lives as if they're in a play. Nothing really matters. They're just going about their business as if they were the main characters. And from here, you'd see her disguise herself or even pull out a very absurd gadget so that it keeps the Joker's momentum alive. She tags the punchline and distracts the enemies so that he could land the prestige. Her improv leads to Joker having very heightened bits. And this right here, I'm looking at all of it as a comedy routine, but that's how it works. It's a very classical sidekick function. Make the lead seem more formidable by smoothing out those edges and filling in the gaps. That's what makes Harley so good in this role, because she is just the villain equivalent of the heroes that we obviously see all the time. It makes it something very special when it works out perfectly. And emotionally, she gives Joker something Batman never will: constant affirmation. She glazes a bit too much, but it helps out, kind of, in her favor, right? When Harley laughs at the Joker's jokes, gives applause to the theatrics, and accepts the rules of this bit, there's a feedback loop that lets Joker be more of the Joker. And that banter supplies a lot of the texture here, right? There's the pet names, right? Puddin', she calls him Puddin' a lot. The domestic squabbles, the petty jealousies that happens here and there, and that turns a very mythical supervillain into a very legible personality. It humanizes the Joker. Instead of being just an agent of chaos, we see how his worst tendencies can be seen in a very domestic setting, and that's what makes it even more scary in some situations. In a lot of episodes like Harley Quinn, where Batman recruits her to stop the Joker's bomb, you see how fluently she reads a lot of his rhythms, right? She anticipates all of these character beats. Her anticipation of how Joker will act shows you how predictable he can be, and how Batman always finds a way to defeat him in the end. A lot of this works on timing and routine, and once you have that to a T, a lot of Joker's schemes are very easily preventable, but then he throws a wrench into all of that, and that's what makes it very concerning in terms of his character. He has a very to-the-number plan, and then he just spins it and gives it a whirly, and it's like, okay, I did not expect that. But really, what does she bring out of Joker? She externalizes a lot of his most important traits, right? His need to control, and that is disguised as comedy. The fun is only fun if he's at the center of it. With Harley in the frame, the show now allows us to see the truth in those private spaces. The lair, the getaway van, the hideout after the heist. That is where the mask slips. The jokes are still funny, but now the punchline is often now landed on Harley. And there is a domestic cruelty aspect. He's very abusive, and that's what makes Joker scarier than any of the toxic laughing gas or weird grinning fish that he may implement. It proves his philosophy isn't just chaos, and Harley often comes at the expense of that. In Mad Love, that crystallizes the cycle, right? Harley plans the perfect trap for Batman to please him, and Joker responds by literally disregarding her, discarding her, and throwing her in the trash, giving her a backhand, and hitting her through a window, and making her fall and plummet many stories down. She almost dies. And after that, she claims that she's going to give up any romantic interest that she has in Mr. J, but as soon as he drops off a letter saying get better soon with some flowers off at Arkham Asylum, then she completely has a twist of mind. It shows you how whipped she is, but that's not all she has. She adds to the mythos. Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, that dynamic is born out of the series, and it becomes one of Gotham's most important relationships. Ivy validates Harley's worth and calls out Joker's manipulation and offers a countermyth to the quote-unquote Gotham Boys Club. Two women are now here building their own brand of criminal mischief, haha. With rules that aren't rooted in humiliation, they can have very fun episodes of just crime romps. But also, on top of that, she also deepens Batman's world by showing that Bruce can treat her with compassion, right? He understands she wants out, and Gotham's systems make it hard to exit. And in the comics, he actually leads to her being fully rehabilitated in Paul Dini's very critically acclaimed Detective Comics run. It's only natural that Harley Quinn's creator will have the final say on her very lengthy but very satisfying character arc. And while I might not like Harley now because of what they're doing with her character, everything that they did in post-Crisis to even the New 52, I am a big fan of. It shows you how the legacy of Batman, that mythos, can be impacted over time. Good stuff. And switching our attention to a superhero, but not one you might expect, but is one of my favorites, and that is Roy Harper, Speedy, Arsenal, Red Arrow. Why is he even named Speedy again? Is it because he could shoot fast arrows? Like, that is such a stupid-ass name for somebody who doesn't have any superpowers. Young Justice, you might have been onto something. But what makes Speedy really special as a character? He, of course, is that on the surface, he is another, like, Robin type of character. Very colorful costume, the quippy personality. He has the bow and arrow with, of course, all the gadgets, right? But from the start, he was crafted to be a younger mirror of Oliver Queen, right? He wasn't just somebody who was tagging along but learning the tricks of the trade, carrying the bow with equal skill. As he got older, he became a better marksman and archer than Oliver himself. He's like that for real. Put some respect on Roy's name. And after that, he was filling in that little space that Oliver left because of his loner billionaire persona. It left it wide open to give you more Batman parallels. Roy wasn't defined by just imitating, right? He stood out as independent and very fiery, and sometimes even hot-headed and kind of a douche. But he had a very sharp wit that complemented Oliver and his very, let's just say, righteous indignation. Because from here, their partnership, while it did click, he had to play off of somebody who was very much a political loudmouth. No matter how right he might be politically, you have to balance that out. The counterbalance was Roy, who gave him some sort of a sounding board, I guess, but somebody who was there to ground him. He was a full extension of Oliver's crusade. But unfortunately, or fortunately, right, in terms of being a very interesting character, Roy's defining trait very early on was his loyalty. He believes in Oliver almost to a fault, and his determination to live up to his mentor, and that example that he provides gives him both his strength and his vulnerability. In Teen Titans World's Finest, we learn that he very much makes excuses for Oliver. He says he's the best mentor, the best this, and that. But then we realize after you peel back the layer, we see into his, not exactly his social life, but how it is behind the scenes when he's not out fighting crime. Oliver, unintentionally, is very neglectful. He's not there for Roy when he needs him, and that usually is because not only does he have his Green Arrow persona to keep up his time, but also him being a billionaire, taking care of a very huge, important company in the United States. In some ways, he's very contradictory. He's compassionate, but he's also hot-headed. He is a rebel, but still very deeply family-oriented. And these traits are why in later stories, his personal struggles hit so hard, man. They kind of feel like they're not contradictions, but logical outcomes of somebody who's been thrust into heroics at such a young age. In the very infamous Green Lantern Green Arrow storyline, I'm pretty sure 85, 86, 1971, Snowbirds Don't Fly, that storyline is the watershed moment, right? Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, they came up with a masterpiece and flipped the sidekick archetype on its head, revealing Speedy's heroin addiction. Instead of the plucky partner that we all came accustomed to, he became a very cautionary tale, the kid who fell through the cracks while his mentor was too busy playing the world's conscience. And that story right there was very shocking for its era. It led to a lot of Comics Code Authority reshuffling, but on top of that, it added a very real human stake to the idea of being a sidekick, and it showed how a lot of his attachment to Oliver blew up in his face, and then Oliver wasn't completely equipped properly to deal with the situation. He doesn't even realize his neglect and what it does to an orphan who thought that he just gained a father. But it shows you that heroes aren't perfect, and sometimes their proteges, they're the ones who bear the cost. But as a duo, what makes Roy and Oliver work is that they have always shown each other to be equals, which is very different to most mentor-sidekick relationships. Oliver, he's very passionate, sometimes very reckless, maybe a lot of the time, but he's a crusader, right? And that energy gets tempered by Roy's very youthful pragmatism, in my opinion, right? Roy really just gives Oliver an audience for his speeches, a test subject for his ideas, his very ideology. He's seeing if he could nurture and build somebody up, a child, into being somebody who follows something quite similar and see if they turn out being better. He's not trying to force their beliefs, but by saying it, will that have some sort of inclination onto what their character will be in the future? Will they take it or will they throw it away? And from what we've seen in the future, yes, while he is a very broken character who goes through a lot of strife and struggle, we see that he is a good man at the end of the day. Ollie did a good job. He just went about it in a very wrong way in the Snowbirds Don't Fly storyline, and that haunts him to this day. The way that he hit him after he found out that he was taking drugs still is something that lingers in the back of his mind every single time he looks at Roy. But that's a good thing. It's better than him just completely neglecting it and throwing it away as if it never happened, or thinking that it wasn't a wrong thing to do in general. The character growth between both of these characters are instrumental to why I think sidekicks are very important in terms of storytelling, and from there we see that he is a reason for Ollie to keep fighting for something personal rather than the abstract political values that he follows. This growth that I've been talking about is what makes him one of the best sidekicks because he goes far beyond this role. He didn't just inherit the mantle of his mentor, he reinvents himself, he becomes Arsenal, he becomes Red Arrow. He's constantly trying and for the most part succeeding in carving out his own identity, whether he's fighting alongside the Titans, the Justice League, the Outsiders, even serving as a governmental operative. He becomes a team leader and eventually a father. Roy's daughter, Leanne, is central to his growth. Having a child literally transformed him from the archetypal troubled sidekick into one of the most human, three-dimensional characters there is. Here we have a costume vigilante who balanced his missions with bedtime stories at his best, right? He fought villains, but also fought to be a present, loving dad. And that relationship right here showed that sidekicks don't just grow up to be heroes, they grow up to be adults with responsibilities, with heartbreaks, and a love that extends beyond the capes and masks. There's this one sequence in the current run of Green Arrow by Chris Condon with Roy Harper really facing his addiction once again. There's this villain called the Crimson Archer, and he shoots arrows and literally overdoses his targets and puts them in this very dreamlike sequence. And from there, he had to deal with it all over again, but now he had his daughter Leanne, and he spoke about his addiction to Leanne, and it was one of the most human things that I've ever read, especially all year. It's one of the best things of Roy becoming a father because he had to deal with it. He didn't want to talk about this with his daughter. You don't want to be vulnerable with your kids because you feel like that might portray you as being weak, but she was there for him. She understands the struggle, and he was going to jump off a building, right? He was like, I can't do this anymore. But then when Leanne came, he snapped out of it and he was like, oh shoot, I'm on top of a building, I'm about to walk off. What am I doing? I have a daughter. And man, that conversation, I'm telling you guys, read Chris Condon Green Arrow. I'm telling you, it's the best he's been in a while. And that says something considering Green Arrow is one of the most consistent comic book characters there is. But yeah, what he does to make me really believe that sidekicks do matter is that he shows Oliver the cost of his tunnel vision and how that leads to him literally failing the person that needed him the most. Through Roy, we realize that Green Arrow isn't untouchable, and through his mistakes, we realize that the superhero world itself can have very painful, real consequences. The balance here sets up the drama. When he fell into addiction, it wasn't just a tragedy. It showed that while sidekicks are supposed to elevate their mentors, why don't we flip that on its head? Roy forced Oliver to confront his blind spots. And later, especially when Roy became Arsenal, he often threw Oliver's lessons back at him, right? Calling him a hypocrite and challenging him to be better. This push and pull dynamic is classic sidekick storytelling, but taken to the next level. It causes Green Arrow to be sharper by refusing to stay in his shadow. And speaking of Batman, let's bring it back to Robin. We did enough references of them in the Roy Harper segment, might as well switch it to the OG. And what I want to do for this segment is break down all of the main Robins and how they complement Batman in the field, right? Because Robin isn't just a single character, it is a legacy mantle passed down through multiple generations of young heroes, each with their own personalities, their own flaws, their character arcs, and growth. That alone makes Robin special, right? Most sidekicks, they exist as a single fixed partner just over there, and then they grow out of it. But Robin is a role, a proving ground to see if you can become something more when you grow older. And usually it leads to them having their own leading role, their own comic book title that they are the main character of. It's somebody who really reshapes the mythos. That's what makes Robin special. Let's go down through the list, starting off with my GOAT, Dick Grayson, the original. So why he works as a sidekick is that he set the standard, right? He was the light to Batman's darkness, a quippy young acrobat who brought energy and relatability to Gotham. And even in the recent Nightwing run, they said that he was like a cackling young imp of a child. He was goofy, bouncing off the walls, but still a complete demon, bro. You did not want to mess with Robin. He made Batman more accessible to readers, especially kids, without diminishing him. He didn't just follow Batman, he humanized him, which we will get into in a little bit. Dick gave Batman something no other character could. It was family. Do you see how thematically Robin works so well with Batman and how it's literally a core part of his character? A lot of people say that Robin shouldn't even be a part of Batman mythos and that he diminishes it. No, he is the next step. Their father-son bond, even though there has been some tensions here and there, it grounded Bruce emotionally. Robin wasn't a soldier, he was a son who reminded Bruce what he was fighting for, similar to Roy Harper. But the legacy here is that Dick grew beyond Robin, becoming Nightwing, now also the leader of the Teen Titans before that, and even becoming Batman himself. His journey showed that these guys could fully evolve into realized heroes. But what makes him special is that he is the light in the dark. Even as a little kid, he was half Batman, half Superman. Hope in humanity. Dick's presence in and of itself challenged Batman and his isolation. Bruce, he's naturally grim, driven, and prone to shutting out others, right? We've seen this many times in recent comics specifically, right? He would say, I gotta work this out alone, and even pushing his family away just to bring them back and realize, oh guys, I remember again. We all work together as a team, we love each other, we should be here for each other in battle. Dick was the first person to crack down on that. Dick forced him to open up, right? He now has a responsibility as a father figure. And this creates, in my opinion, richer storytelling because Batman isn't just a lonely, brooding man, right? He's somebody who's trying, and while he might often fail, he's trying to raise a child in the middle of Gotham's darkness. And based on just like an enjoyment standpoint, it's better to have somebody to talk to, the dynamic back and forth. It's really just cool to see both of their personalities interact because Batman has to temper the darkness inside him with compassion, which keeps him level-headed. But without Dick, Bruce risks losing touch with his humanity, and this benefits stories because now there is an exploration that we can now dive into. As a writer, this is a goldmine. It makes a lot of his victories and failures more personal. But from there we have Jason Todd. I'm going to call him the Rebel. Jason was never content to just play Batman's game. He was a lot more impulsive, a lot angrier, a lot rougher around the edges, and he embodied the sidekick as a foil, right? Somebody that he could rely on. Of course, Bruce could see him be like, okay, you're Robin, so obviously you're going to help me out. You're obviously going to be on my side 100% in terms of just, the love aspect, right? You are my father, basically. You adopted me off the streets. I will have undying loyalty to you. But ideologically, in terms of how to deal out punishments towards certain criminals, they couldn't be more different. And I know there is a lot of Jason stans out there being like, oh, Jason was just a little, cute little boy and blah, blah, blah. They want us to go off of the pre-crisis version of Jason. Newsflash, Jason was only an interesting and well-developed character when he was completely different from Dick Grayson. Yes, he could be slightly, written well as a Dick Grayson clone, but it makes him very much less unique. Why would I decide to read about him or even try to delve deep into that if it's just going to be a carbon copy? If your background is one-to-one with the first Robin, what makes you stand out? Nothing. So while he might not be the best Robin, he became a lot more interesting under the penmanship of Jim Starlin. Instead of balancing Batman, he clashed with him, and that exposed a lot of Bruce's faults. And Jason's greatest contribution, I think, to the mythos came with his fall, his murder at the hands of the Joker. That broke Batman in a way that no other villain could. So not only did that raise up the stocks of what Jason's legacy will be for the Batman mythos, it also raised up Joker stocks, right? He just became a lot bigger of a threat. And then it also led to a lot more just character analysis of Bruce, him just having moments where he just breaks out and starts beating the brakes off a Joker, like in Nightfall, right? He was thrown into Scarecrow's fear toxin, and then he started hallucinating about Jason dying over and over again. And Joker, the man who was responsible, is right in front of him. So he actually spun the wheel on these guys because they thought they were going to put him on the back foot, but it did the exact opposite. It proved the stakes of bringing children into a war. Jason revealed both Batman's failure as a mentor and the fragility of the Robin mantle. And when he returned as Red Hood for the first storyline, which is really good, the only good one, pause. I don't agree with that, but I'm trying to tick off the Red Hood fans. I'm being oh no, oh boy. But it further added complexity. What happens when a sidekick adapts the skills of their mentor, but rejects that level of humanity? Jason proved that Robin isn't just a costume. It's literally a crucible that defines what kind of hero you will become in the future. It's his greatest fear. Batman, what happens when his mission fails a child? His oath, the beginning of his journey is like, I'm doing this, I'm becoming Batman, so that what happened to me as a kid will never happen to any other kids ever again. But what if the fate of my parents befalls a child? You know, it wasn't the other way around, it actually happened to a child. That is what's crazy. Unlike Dick, Jason didn't just balance Batman, he questioned his methods. He pushed against the rules, something that of course Dick did as well, but not to this extent. And ultimately, he paid the price. Jason, in and of himself, he forces Batman and the readers to confront whether his war on crime is ethical or reckless. When he was Red Hood, that challenge deepens. Batman must wrestle with a former sidekick who exposes the hypocrisy of his no-kill rule, quote unquote. I actually agree with the no-kill rule, and he has nothing to prove to anybody else. If you don't want to kill, you don't want to kill. So many other heroes have done that and they've gotten off scot-free. Spider-Man, he doesn't kill. Daredevil, he doesn't kill. Captain America, I mean, he does kill when he needs to in very rare circumstances, but look at his rogues gallery, most of them are still alive, and if they aren't alive, they weren't killed by his hand. Iron Man, he's known to kill when he needs to, but most of his rogues gallery are still there, you know? So I don't have a problem with it, especially within superhero comics, when people can get resurrected. But from here, it adds a lot more of a constant moral tension, making the stories more layered. Because a lot of people like to say that Batman's no-kill rule is a plot hole, which, of course, unintelligent people say this, but it shows these readers, or the people that are watching videos on these books, that the writers have thought about all this. They're going at it from many different ethical angles. There's a lot of ways to look at it, and that's what makes these stories so interesting. And I am grateful for that, because it allows for a lot of people of different moral values just to come in one space, and we get to talk it out. And if you are somebody who's like, you know, very put together, it's going to lead to a very interesting conversation. But I don't know why I'm talking like this is the last Robin. We have a lot to go through here. The next Robin that I want to talk about is Tim Drake. And with Tim, he is the detective, right? He's unique because he chose Batman. He deduced that Bruce and Dick, their identities were Batman and Robin. And he argued that Batman needed a Robin to keep him sane. That framing flipped the sidekick role from apprentice to safeguard. You see what we're doing here? That's interesting. And Tim's intelligence and his skills, that complemented Batman perfectly. He wasn't the acrobat or the rebel, he was the strategist. Not saying that the other Robins couldn't do that as well, but he was more like Batman, I think, than any of the other Robins, just in terms of personality base, not in terms of background, because I think Dick has that on lock. Both of them had their parents die in front of them. That's the trauma angle that they both share, which keeps them so connected to each other all these years later. But Tim, he realized his role. He didn't decide to outstep what he was, right? What Jason tried to do, and of course what Dick did. He realizes that he is just a sidekick, and through other opportunities from, of course, Nightfall happening and Bruce taken out of the picture, then he realizes, oh, I can be a solo hero, something that the other Robins never did. And then another opportunity presented itself, and he became a leader, a founder of Young Justice, and then of the Teen Titans, the newly formed one. So he realizes his role in the bigger picture, and when he sees an opportunity, he won't stop, right? He will jump at the sake of doing it, but he won't try to carve it out himself. And I think is what kept him alive after Jason's death. On top of the fact that he got a lot more training. As a strategist, he was the one who kept the mission intact when Batman's emotions clouded his judgment. He was his anchor. He showed during his tenure that Robin isn't just about youth or being flashy, it's about providing what Batman lacks. And later as Robin, Red Robin that is, he carried that detective tradition forward, keeping the legacy alive while carving out his own path while Batman was away. Tim, above all else, is logic and stability. He was the first stabilizer to Batman. He kept Batman from going over the edge and killing people, from him even losing his own life because he was pushing himself to the brink. He was juggling way too much, and Tim could see that. He stopped him from spiraling after the death of Jason. It's really fascinating because he was the first sidekick, I think, to show that they can also be a guardian of the hero's humanity. They don't just have to be a learner, they could also teach their mentor a thing or two. That's sick. And then we have the most underrated Robin of all time. Tim is also one of those people. but that is Damian Wayne, the Hare. He is Bruce's biological son raised by the League of Assassins before being dropped off into Batman's world, literally. And unlike the others, he doesn't want to be Robin, he wants to be Batman immediately. And that tension is what makes Robin's tenure here, at the very beginning at least, very unique. There is a constant negotiation between Bruce and his mission, and Damian and his need for approval, discipline, and love. Unlike Dick or Tim, Damian doesn't balance Batman. He amplifies his flaws, forcing Bruce to grow as a parent. He was a full-blown killer, and Batman had to grow as a person to get all of that out of Damian's system. His legacy here represents a mantle evolving into something deeply personal. Now, Robin is a story about inheritance, blood, and whether Batman's legacy is a gift or a curse. Damian, of course, keeps Robin relevant now in the modern age by showing that it could still produce fresh, challenging dynamics. What I love about all of these Robins is that none of them are like the other. A lot of people compare them to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I honestly couldn't have thought of a better analogy myself. Damian, of course, is the analog to Michelangelo, but unlike Mikey, he has a theme of redemption, and he goes on a long, decade-long journey of finding himself. His lethal upbringing clashes with Batman's staunch moral code, and as I've said before, it forces both of them to evolve like a Pokemon. It's about whether Batman's legacy will save Damian or doom him. There's this one quote in, I'm pretty sure, Ram V's Detective Comics run under the penmanship of Dan Waters in a backup story, one of my favorite writers. He says, "One day, Damian Wayne will break or destroy the world." That's how much influence he has over the future of DC Comics. When he becomes Batman, he either becomes literally the spawn of the devil, he makes a deal with him, or he's somebody who enforces hope and deals with the next generation of heroes, influencing them to be the best version of themselves. That's what's left in Damian's future, and now, as we've seen in PKJ's Batman run, we see that he is on the right path. He realizes that he can follow not only in the path of his father to be a good sidekick, to be Robin, but he can also have a life. He learned the Dick Grayson method, right? You have to have two sides of you. And now he's volunteering at a hospital to be a doctor's assistant. He wants to follow in the footsteps of his grandfather to be a doctor just like Thomas Wayne. But unbeknownst to him, he's also following in the footsteps of his other grandfather, but before he became all big and bad, because Ra's al Ghul, before he became the head of the demon, he was also a doctor. Isn't it so cool how the story of Batman just came in a loop? Like, it's a full circle. Everything just feels so satisfying now. All of the books are really good. All the characters, for the most part, except Jason, because, he kind of sucks, are getting good character development. What a time to be a Batman fan. But we've been talking about a lot of DC lately. Let's switch our sides to Marvel a little bit. Marvel, we all know, don't really do sidekicks as much as DC, at least not as well. But one character that I've always loved, as a little kid even, I had a bunch of figurines, that is War Machine, the soldier who grounds Iron Man. Why he works as a sidekick is that he's not just Tony Stark's best friend, he's the steady hand behind that genius. Tony is impulsive, egotistical at times, and even self-destructive in his worst days. Rhodey, he's disciplined, he's loyal, he is mission-driven. Their dynamic, it clicks, because Rhodey doesn't simply tag along. He provides a structure to the storm that is Iron Man. Unlike many other sidekicks, Rhodey, he has all of his training. He is a decorated military pilot, and he was also, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, an engineer, right before even donning the armor. And that makes him a rare kind of sidekick, one who is a peer and not a subordinate, right? Rhodey challenges Tony not by learning from him because he knows everything that he needs to know for the most part, but by standing shoulder to shoulder with him, embodying that idea that Iron Man's story isn't just being a genius. It isn't about having a multitude of different ways to gain money, or just even the amount of cash that he has at any given time. It's about teamwork, the cost of war, and most importantly, responsibility. His most defining thing is that he's one of the few people that Tony Stark can trust completely, and that bond allows him to step into the armor when Tony can't. When Tony relapsed into alcoholism, I'm pretty sure it was an Iron Man 170, I'm pretty sure. It was Tony. It was Rhodey who became Iron Man. So he kept the legacy alive when the creator essentially fell apart. Rhodey wasn't just filling in, he was proving that Iron Man was bigger than Tony Stark. This might have been the first time when a sidekick, quote unquote, I don't even know if he was War Machine at this point, I don't think he was actually, but when a side character, took over the mantle of the protagonist and did it pretty well. A lot of people don't know this, but he was actually the main Iron Man in the first Secret Wars event, with Molecule Man, with Doctor Doom, with Spider-Man getting the symbiote suit for the first time. That wasn't Tony, that was Rhodey. But as War Machine, Rhodey took the blueprint of being a military man and applied it to the Iron Man suit. He leaned more into that tactical, heavy weapons approach. He was the heavy to Iron Man's assault class. If you guys play Battlefront 2, or if you did, you know what I'm talking about. And it's really interesting because while Tony kind of wrestled with futurism, right? He was a man of the future. Rhodey was very realistic. Realism, that was the name of the game for him. And his growth really reflects a soldier, in my opinion, navigating the line between heroism and militarization, and his stories often question what happens when technology made for peace become a weapon of war, and that in and of itself becomes very intrinsic to Iron Man as a character, right? As he started off, he was a weapons manufacturer. How about we just apply all of those weapons that Tony saw in the field, the weapons that he created, and let's apply it to an Iron Man suit that he has to see every day, at least when he's working with Rhodey. It's very interesting symbolism. I kind of relate Rhodey to like Jon Stewart. He's a lot more structured and methodical, and when you work with Tony, who is very chaotic and improv, right? That's who he is. It actually challenges Rhodey because now Rhodey, as a sidekick, has to call him out, and he isn't afraid of that. He challenges his ego, and at times he's even able to take the armor away from him if he believes Tony is unfit to wear it. That is something that we saw in Iron Man 2, right? Movie watchers, you know what I'm talking about. And their friendship, put yourself in Rhodey's shoes, it's not just about a man and his machines, it's about a friendship that survives addiction, war, betrayal, and at points in their careers, even death. Through thick and thin, Rhodey is always going to be there. He doesn't abandon Tony, even when Tony abandons himself. No matter what's happening, all the rigmarole, all the crazy stuff, he's there. He is the emotional support that makes Tony's survival, and therefore Iron Man's longevity, possible. Think about it. This is a story about one man and his inventions and the cost, the human cost, of heroism. And Rhodey, what is he doing? He is making sure that he survives. He ensures that the mythos itself survives, because he is there to pick up the burden when Tony falls. I'm sure all of us wishes that we could have a friend like Rhodey. I wish all of you, I want to bless all of you, I'm sending my blessings to all of you, that you have a friend like Rhodey. This man is day one, ride or die. And the last sidekick that I want to talk about to kind of lay out my case for why sidekicks matter, I'm being so honest, I don't really like that many sidekicks that much other than the novelty. A lot of the Teen Titans members, yeah, they're kind of cool, but they're better when they're adults and they're not sidekicks anymore, you feel me? But keeping my way with Marvel, I want to talk about Bucky Barnes, the character that I think is the only person in Marvel to have the Dick Grayson treatment, to be a character who was really cool as a sidekick, but then grow out of that role and forge their own identity and be just as, if not cooler, in that other role. When he became Winter Soldier, that was peak, and this kid right here, he is a mini devil. He does a lot of things that Captain America would never do. He's willing to get his hands dirty, and even as a little kid, even in the Hell Hunters miniseries, when he had like a whole group of people, like a literal World War II Ghost Rider and Wolverine, that showed you that this kid was, if not possessed by the devil, but by a demon. What a psychotic kid. If we thought that Dick Grayson was a dancing imp of a child, imagine having that personality, putting it on somebody else, but then they're a killer. So they're joking, they're smiling, they're goofing around, they're bouncing up and down, but they're also likely to cut your throat open and start dancing in your blood. That might be a bit too much, but that is not too far off from what I've seen this guy do. There's a reason why he's available to do special ops missions and Captain America has to opt out. But stepping back a bit, let's look at the character. He looks like a very archetypal golden age character, right? Very bright, very youthful, and he has to balance that noble, stoic Captain America. Bucky was more brash though, while Steve was more composed. You can somewhat see the Jason Todd similarities, but Dick Grayson, he was just like that as well. He had that anger, that fiery spirit within him as well, so I think he's more like Dick than anybody else. And he has good books, just like Dick, unlike Jason Todd. I am poking the bear so much right now, but his energy gave readers a way to connect to Cap beyond, of course, the larger-than-life patriotism that obviously could have carried the book, especially considering the time that these books were published, right? During World War II, all you really needed was a symbol. They didn't have to add a sidekick, but they did it for the kid readers, the ones who got hope from reading these books. But Bucky's importance, it didn't vanish after he died, just like Jason Todd, but I think to a greater extent. His absence became an important part of his presence. This guy was an actual child soldier who paid the price, right? And this gave Captain America a tragic weight. He had PTSD. He had moments where he would just reminisce about Bucky, and other people around him would remind him of Bucky. That was always on his mind. If you think about it, the subject matter is very dark because he symbolized the sacrifices that are demanded of soldiers, but they placed that on a kid, and there were so many kids that had to go out there and die in battle. That is who he represents, right? The ones who couldn't make it home. Granted, the symbolism gets kind of washed away when you think about the Winter Soldier, but if we look at both of these characters, the young Bucky versus the Bucky now, they couldn't be more far apart. He became more stoic than Steve Rogers because he had a script within him. He had code telling him exactly what to do. He wasn't a clanker just yet. Actually, wait, brother is a clanker. He has a full arm of metal. I should not call him that, but young Bucky, what makes him cool is that it turned Captain America of less of a propaganda symbol and more of a mentor figure. He was a full-fledged character, and applying that to Captain America, it fleshes him out more as well. Without all of these interactions, these connections between people, Captain America just becomes a propaganda machine. That's what he was in the first place, obviously, but of course for a good purpose. Who wouldn't want to buy a comic seeing Captain America punch Adolf, I don't even know if I could say his name, square in the jaw? That sounds like peak fiction to me. But he returned decades later as the Winter Soldier, an assassin for Soviet Russia, but just like Damian Wayne, his story was one of redemption. The boy who once embodied optimism, quote unquote, he was still kind of a psychopath, was now the man carrying the weight of sins that he did not choose. All of the things that he did shouldn't be over his head, but he got taken, and he did all of those actions with his face plastered all over the world. So now what can you really do other than try to be better? This evolution made him one of the more compelling sidekicks in comic book history. A reclaimed sidekick, that is, because Jason Todd is not as cool as him. And all of that history really shows you that sidekicks don't need to stay frozen in time. As a dynamic duo, it's very interesting because Steve, he represents an incorruptible ideal. Bucky, he gets corrupted. No arguing you can do about it. He shows what happens when those ideals are broken in the field. Bucky, he reflected everything that Steve feared about himself and his mission. What happens when loyalty and patriotism are twisted into weapons? They become stories not just about fighting Nazis or terrorists, but about forgiveness, right? And whether someone can ever reclaim their soul after being turned into a tool of war. What would you do if you got brainwashed? You had to do incalculable amounts of damage to many different lives around the world. You killed very important people who would have decided the fate of the future for both good and bad. What if you killed more good than bad, right? What would you do? What would you think? Do you think that you're worth living, even though all of those actions were not your own? You're still guilty. You still feel the guilt. On a piece of paper, they're going to say Bucky Barnes did this, not the Winter Soldier. That identity is just a moniker for you. That is the emotional and psychological core of the character, and that is what makes his redemption so special when he became Captain America, when he reclaimed the Winter Soldier identity to be something more positive. Bucky shows that the best sidekicks are more than just supporting players. They are the core of that mythos, the one character who can break that hero and then make him whole again. But what do you guys think? Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on post notifications so you know when a new video goes live. Do you guys think that sidekicks are outdated, or should they still be here in the modern era? Should there be more of them? And who is your favorite sidekick? Let me know. And yeah, see you all later. Take care. Deuces. Peace.